Today we are on to our final session, and today we are on to our final session, and today we have our faculty, Dr. Tom Verghese M. He is a psychiatrist at Government General Hospital, Calicut. Thank you, sir. With the Department of Clinical Psychology and CRC, thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us in this webinar series. Thank you so much, sir.
You're
Sir,
welcome.
over to you. Uh,
So shall we start?
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me thank the CRC Kozhikode, faculties of CRC Kozhikode and psychology department, clinical psychology department of IMHANS for giving me this opportunity to present a topic that is so relevant in the current scenario. I hope it will be worth your while. So the discussion today, or today's discussion, is psychiatric rehabilitation, current trends and perspectives. This number may look phone number, but this is actually the number of patients who are suffering from psychiatric illness in the world, according to the data of World Health Organization in 2016. This is a 10-digit number. That means it is close to 1 billion. The thing is that this number does not incorporate the, excuse me. Okay, this number does not incorporate all the patients who are suffering from substance use disorder. When you combine that with the number of people who are having mental illness, we get 1 billion who are. That in, we must understand that in 2016, the world population was 7.5 billion. So about 1 in 7 people are suffering from one form of a mental illness or another. And the mental illness contributed to 7% of all the disabilities in the world as measured disability adjusted life years. However, many of the experts often that this value of 7% is a gross underestimation. An article in Lancet in 2017 described that this type of evaluation of disability caused by mental illness not incorporate many important areas of mental illness like neuropsychiatric conditions, certain forms of dementia, suicide, personality disorders. Now we all know personality disorder itself can figure is a burden. Pain syndrome, most of the pain syndrome has a psychology, but most of the pain will be going to a physician first. So it was not incorporated into a into the calculation. And also most people with severe mental illness like schizophrenia, because of that mental illness, their mortality and morbidity will be very high. In other words, they have lower life expectancy and lower quality of life. So all these factors were not incorporated when this calculation was made. So these experts did a revised calculation, and it was that 13% of all the disability caused in this world is actually due to mental illness. If this estimation is to be believed, then are without one cause of worldwide. Actually, when something to something to be proud of, in this case, it is a source of concern. In situation in India is quite simple. The recent study, actually study was published 2 months ago. Study explained that 1 in every 7 Indian was affected by a mental disorder of varying severity. And proportional contribution of mental disorder, total burden, almost doubled since 1990. 2.99 now 4.7%. So it compared to the global burden of 7%, 4.7 seems to be lower. This is because India being a developing country, we have problems with other illnesses like malnutrition, communicable diseases, and certain other non-communicable diseases. So that is why the proportion of patients with psychiatric disability, even though is high, the percentage of disability that we have is lower than the global average. When we look at division, we can contributes to disability 3%, followed by anxiety, followed by disability and schizophrenia. Other illnesses like, for example, conduct disorder or eating disorder, everything incorporated into the other 28%. So this is the rough idea about the mental illness in India. Now, this is an interesting study done in 2016, I think. And in this study, what they did is actually a very simple design. They took all the patients who came to a psychiatric institute, and then they did the IDEA scale, or Indian Disability Evaluation and Assessment and Evaluation Scale, and looked at the proportion of patients who are suffering to disability, that is 40% disability. It was found that this data found that the high number of disability seen in dementia patients, the percentage of patients with dementia had significant disability. It was closely followed by schizophrenia. Mood disorders like bipolar and depression had a 30% proportion of patients, and alcohol use disorder, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder had around 15 to 16% of patients suffering from significant disability. Now, this is a cross-sectional analysis, so we should view it as a cross-sectional problem, cross-sectional data. Longitudinally, there may be variations. So even then, when you think about it, in clinically also, this is something that we can relate to, because we know that most patients with schizophrenia and have some disability. It becomes less comes to alcohol disorder when it comes. Next, we are going to deal with what we call a response, remission, and recovery. Response, remission, and recovery is something that is important in management of mental illness. Now, I know that people are aware of what this is. Even then, just to jog your memory, I am going to briefly explain it. So response first in the after treatment. So this class find 50 decrease in the symptom score as reported by a standardized scale. For example, in Hamilton's depression or anxiety scale, a 50% response or decrease in symptoms compared to the baseline is considered as a response. Response. However, in certain diseases like obsessive compulsive disorder and treatment resistant schizophrenia, the response is considered as about 25 to 30%, 30%. 25% decrease in score considered. And remission different. In the aim is no or at least minimal symptoms, and usually remission is associated with a particular time period. A duration criteria is there. For example, when we look at depression or anxiety, remission is usually defined in studies as HAM-D score of less than or equal to 7, or HAM-A score of less than or equal to 7, associated with certain duration criteria. In recovery, on the other hand, is a completely different concept. Recovery is not only the absence of symptoms, also the pre level of function. So that is recovery. Now let us look at various studies that have recently been published and to see what the rates of remission and the rates of recovery is. So, as you can see, excuse me, as you can see, so we have incorporated all illnesses, schizophrenia, depression, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and in patients of bipolar affective disorder. Now we are the first table, the first column looks at the clinical remission, or what we call the minimum or absence of symptoms according to rating scale. And the second column, or the third column in here, is the functional recovery. Functional recovery means not only clinical remission, but also an absence of disability or an ability to return to pre-morbid level. That is called functional recovery for some period of time. Usually functional recovery is considered 2 years in certain definitions. Certain times it increases to 5 years. So functional recovery is there. When you look at the data, it's quite clear that there is a significant difference between remission and functional recovery. If you schizophrenia, the clinical remission is seen 5 to 50% of patients with the evidence-based treatment. Even with the best evidence-based treatment, 35 to 50% of patients with schizophrenia only experience remission, but the functional recovery is only 13.5%. In spite of all the best efforts that the medicines, a psychiatrist and supportive psychologist, everyone is providing, only 30% of patients are recovering from the illness of schizophrenia. Depression, the remission is 70% and the recovery is 52%. Anxiety, remission is 72 and recovery is 40%. Obsessive compulsive disorder, clinical remission or sustained remission is seen in different studies from 32 to 70%. Recovery defined in a schizophrenic disorder yet. No regarding the functional recovery rates in OCD. In bipolar disorder, similarly 72% and 43%. So when you these references, you can see that one highlighted are systematic reviews or meta-analysis, while others are individual studies. So it is clear that there is a huge gap between what we consider a satisfactory clinical outcome, that is remission, and what patient considers a satisfactory clinical outcome, that is functional recovery. So what happened is that because of this overwhelming evidence, our concept of treatment has changed clinical remission to functional. So we now consider we are successful remitting patient or decreasing the symptoms of the patient. It is not considered as the goal of treatment. The goal of treatment is, of course, functional recovery. So the functional recovery is usually measured with help in studies with the help of standardized rating scales and some disability scale like Sheehan disability scale. So Sheehan disability scale will provide you with an indirect what we call indication of the level. Now, how to define recovery? To define recovery is by there are two parallel definitions of consumers or patients or clients define recovery as the attainment of meaningful and valued life rather than the absence of symptoms. They are not concerned much about the absence of symptoms. They are more concerned about the attainment of meaningful and valued life, and it is logical. The clinician's point of view, of course, recovery means elimination of symptoms and returning to normal functioning. Because in clinician's point of view, it should be more objective, and we have to do evidence-based objective studies based on it. Therefore, I believe that our definition of is different of consumer. So we proceed. So this is all. Why does a functional recovery has and clinical remission has so much difference in statistics? So to it, 2004, a real functioning of schizophrenia was introduced. Now, Don't worry about the figure. It may look a bit complicated. It is actually quite simple. And the real world functioning model of schizophrenia was introduced. And in it, if you look carefully, see in the part of the figure, is called the aim thriving, that is function. And the left figure, we can that these symptoms, negative or disorganization, neurocognitive symptoms. So these are the symptoms which are the focus that we focus on for clinical remission. And this is something that is representative of what we call functional recovery. So there is something called, so there are a lot of intermediaries that we previously ignored, and it is because of this intermediate or something that we see in the middle that there is a difference between functional and clinical remission. That includes engagement services, functional capacity. Now, functional capacity, ability in environment, self, including skills, right? And internalized stigma, social cognition. Along with it, the resilience and incentives. These are the factors which play a role, act as a bridge between the symptoms and the real life function. So this should be incorporated in our diagnosis. When you see a patient, now this is actually a model for schizophrenia. You can generalize this model for all psychiatric illnesses and developmental disorders. So these things, these intermediaries should be focused in diagnosis. Diagnosis is what we functional looking clinical diagnosis, what we are looking for a functional diagnosis. So in functional diagnosis, there are three variables: disease variable, in which symptoms like positive symptom, negative symptom, characteristic symptoms, cognition and functional capacity is assessed. Social variables, including social support like expressed emotion, internalized stigma is assessed, and personal variables like resilience, engagement to service is assessed. And assessing all these aspects together, we cross what we call a function. Is the advantage of making a diagnosis or a clinical functional diagnosis can help us create what we call an individualized treatment plan, not one size fit all model. It is an individualized, patient tailored, what we call patient tailored treatment or management plan. And we can use the evidence-based medicine. For example, in schizophrenia rehabilitation, evidence-based medicine can be used to understand which types of treatment is better for the patient, which all types of treatments are not important in this table. Now, this table, in the left side, we can see four types of non-pharmacological or psychological interventions and psychosocial interventions, which are considered to be important in rehabilitation of schizophrenia. And look at the different symptoms that are seen across the table. So when you look at cognitive remediation, though have no effect on positive, negative, or relapse prevention, it has good effect, has a significant on symptoms of. There is a effect in symptoms of the patient, like memory, like attention, executive function, and this actually translates into social skills, and there is some improvement in the social skills in patients with schizophrenia who are having cognitive remediation. Now 2+ means there is moderate effect size in the study, there is good evidence in the study. 1+ means there is either low effect size or the evidence is weak. Okay. Psychoeducation may not have any action on positive and cognitive skill, but psychoeducation is quite important. Education, especially for the purpose, important prevention. Without a doubt, psychoeducation is important for prevention in schizophrenia. Also, psychoeducation can help internalize stigma, that a factor that we have come across earlier. Psychoeducation can significantly affect the internalized stigma associated with illness. Social skill training. Social skills training can improve the social skills as expected, and it has an indirect and small effect on negative symptoms. You know, asociality is an important negative symptom in schizophrenia, so it has indirect negative symptoms. And cognitive therapy, significant positive symptoms and some negative. So, to functional diagnosis, the patient which are types of rehabilitation measures this patient has to be taken. That is cognitive, psychoeducation, social skill, and cognitive therapy. Excuse me. Okay. So this is concerning how to approach a patient. Now, well, let us look at the relationship, relationship between doctor-patient. In the published in 56, three of interaction relation between patient and a doctor and a patient was described. The first model was activity passivity model. Second was guidance cooperation model, and third was mutual participation model. This was the first attempt to try to categorize the doctor patient or therapist client relationship. So what is activity passivity model? Activity passivity model is similarly what we call a paternalistic model, in which role of the doctor is doing something to the patient, and role of the patient is receiving whatever the doctor is prescribing. Receiving what the doctor is prescribing, and this prototype model is seen interaction parent. So it does not have any in is entirely dependent upon the for survival. So that activity patient is dependent on doctor or a therapist for his or her survival. The second model is slightly better model. It was considered a guidance cooperation model. In guidance cooperation model, the patient actually agrees or cooperates with the doctor or agrees that he will follow all the instructions that the doctor or a therapist is suggesting. So this is called guidance cooperation model, usually seen in a parent-child or parent-adolescent, in which you can actually, the adolescent is entirely help or semi. The final is, of course, mutual participation. Which happens is pay high, then so we therapist is patient has the expertise to help himself. So that is help patient help himself is the role of the doctor, and the role of the patient is to participate, use experts' help in improving one's own situation. So this is the type of interaction that is seen between an adult and an adult. So it is an adult-adult relationship. When you look at the history, the relationship between a doctor or a therapist client is actually complicated. Like relationship is always complicated. So 1970s, doctors to doctor actually quite only and people like landlords are privy or are lucky enough to have services of the doctor. At that time, because the patients were all privileged, it was a patient-dominated scenario. But in 1800s, as hospitals as an institutions came about in 1800s. They were incorporated, and because of that, it became doctor-dominated kind of relationship. But in late 1800s, psychoanalysis and psychosocial theories began to further constitute the patient as a subject. One of the greatest contributions to the by the field of psychology to the field of medicine is the perspective we have given regarding the patient not as a combination of symptoms, but as a subject. And 15, SAS Hollander, that is the classification that we have seen, and of course the introduction of balanced psychodynamics theory into general practice. Balin was a physician and a psychodynamic practitioner, so his theory was incorporated into general practice, and from there onwards we had a patient-centric, or we are moving towards what we call a patient-centric view instead of a doctor-centric view. In India, I believe that is not quite there. In India, my many years and my I've seen always a paternalist view, telling patients to what to what not to. It's not in with it. In view of the current trend, a paternalistic view has been replaced by patient-centric view. So this is something important. So this concept or this gradual change embodied in the United Nations Convention on Rights of People with Disability that occurred in 2006. So this is a landmark convention which embodied the spirit of this patient-centric nature. And everything that we are going to discuss from now regarding rehabilitation, education, supported how everything that has emerged view of doctor therapist client relationship. So United Nations Convention, or UNCRPD of 2006 acknowledged that patient is a person with rights, with views, and they should be treated with respect and integrity. And because from that, our two latest acts, Rights of Person with Disability Act in 2016 and Mental Health Care Act in 2017 came about. Now, it is not perfect act, or it's not the perfect representation of the CRP convention, but it is a good first of it by government to way thinking about people with disability, especially people with psychiatric disability. So next we are looking at vocational rehabilitation. So this is the same. So in vocational rehabilitation, there was two schools of thought. The first school of thought was that, okay, patients with severe mental illness, they are so weak, they are so powerless, they are so incapable of doing anything on their own. So first of all, we have to train them to assess for their and weakness. Then we give them skill training. We have to tell them how. Then we place the job that is best. So this was an important. This was how we were thinking in the past. So this is called a train and place model. It kind of is the paternalistic attitude. Like a father, we are deciding what is best for the patient. So train and place model evaluate and improve patients' attitude, skills, appearance, and readiness before placement, and did an extensive pre-employment assessment. It spanned on 4 months, and it included preparatory exercises like skill training, workshop, and transitional employment. Transitional employment means an employment in a supported environment and then going into a competitive field. So there's a transitional employment. It was theoretically, this seems like a very important, also very logical thing. Intuitively, it looks like a very logical thing, but the truth is that it has been a complete failure. Most patients were disengaged during the preparatory phase, and most people did not adhere to the that were added to the train model. The paternalistic model has failed, and now is showing is playing what most of this is not something is that has happened in the last 5 years. It has been there. It has been going and has been going from I believe 1980s. This trend has been going, and still it is part of an important revolution. So that's why I have incorporated this into my slides. So individual placement support another name for it is support education or support employment. And in individual placement and support, the patient is actually placed in a job without any extensive evaluation or without any extensive training. The patients are placed in the particular job and in a competitive job, not the job that is like a transitional, but just a competitive job. Patients there allowed to. So truth is that allowed seems like intuitive of thing, disability significant and evaluation is directly placed to a job which the patient prefers. That is an important thing. The job that patient prefers. So patient preference may not always be attuned with their skills, but still it is there. So, and other aspects of individual placement and support is zero exclusion. Doesn't matter how bad disability is. You may have profound disability for all you care, total disability for all you care. If you want to work, you can work. That is called zero exclusion. Patient preference. Patient decides which job he prefers among the choices. Of course, maybe he won't be able to become something like a high administrative position, but generally among the jobs available, patient should have the freedom to choose. Rapid jobs. You don't have to wait long. If they wants to work, and you search for the job rapidly and give them options so that they can select. Competitive employment. No special what we call no special considerations. Here the is included and into the environment. Not some member with disability is considered as an equal member. So it should be a competitive employment. Individualized support for the patient should be given, of course, even in the competitive environment. And as part of policymakers, the job development, government should ensure that job development and reservation for the job should be reserved for people who are suffering from disability, like psychiatric illnesses. So this is the key characteristics of individual placement and support. Now, both are there. Logically, train and place model seems to be a logical option, but individual placement and support doesn't seem to be logical. Let us see how the result show. 2004 systematic review of 20 randomized trials. Never seen which shows that individual placement and support is I have never seen any data such an overwhelming evidence. Usually there will be one or two against it, but in RCT multinational studies, multicentric studies, we have found that every study there is a significant improvement with individual placement or supported employment compared to the train and place model. So this is the black bar is for the individual support placement or support employment. A bar is other thing and placement, and a bar can in some studies it's actually a control which no model was adopted. So without any doubt, it has been proven that individual placement and support is the best way to go in regards to vocational training. And housing model. Now let us look at housing models. Now this is something that is relevant in the contemporary sense, because after there is the homeless people, and most of the homeless people are what we call destitutes or wandering people. These people have some sort of psychiatric illness or some addiction. So all the some level, but they are they are not appropriate care in our conventional setup. But once the COVID crisis started happening, what happened was that these people had to be managed, because it was so we actually put them in COVID care centers and we started psychiatric treatment. It's not for their benefit, actually, it is for the benefit of ourselves that we are doing it. But it kind of brought forth the hypocrisy, or how we were ignoring this large population. It was a large population in our district. I think it is more than 10,000 people in different COVID care centers, and most of them are having some level of psychiatric problem or substance use problem. So that is that. So in this context, let us look at the housing models. Housing models is how the patients who are having psychiatric disability need to be housed, called the housing. So two important segregation engagement. Sorry about the terms, not important. Just look at the behind the segregation. With it is a model, like this paternalistic model. It seems seems to be getting it wrong many of the time. So in paternalistic model, we believe that yes, patients with severe mental illness are incapable of taking care of themselves. They are incapable of living alone. They should be segregated and should be kept in a nursing care facility or in a mental hospital, mental health care center, or in daycare homes. So a segregation model was there. And in linkage, what it meant was that in certain homeless patients with psychiatric illnesses, the housing was given if they agreed to participate in the mental health services. That is, housing was linked to the mental health services. So they agreed to participate in the mental health services. So like I said, segregate linkage model, that patient disorders supervision, and see how nursing home patients were used. It was linked to mental health. However, the newer model is the housing first model. In housing first model is similarly counterintuitive. You just give accommodation to the homeless person with psychiatric illness. No questions asked. There is not, or a substance use disorder. No questions asked. Just give them a place to stay. It assumes that people need housing as a foundation from which they can pursue their goals. It is not the other way around. If you give them the housing, they will get better. It is not after they get better, we'll give them housing. If you give them a house, they get better. That is the housing first model. And it has an individual, it gives a person individual houses with no precondition to participate in treatment other services. Now there we concerned about things. So many patients use this, like opioid and other hard drugs. If we give them a domicile, what happens is that will become an opioid den. So that was a concern that we had. That means it will be a center for people to come and use the drugs. But what happened is that, again, our paternalistic view was put to test, and we found out that people with serious illness can maintain independent housing in long term. This is a 2014 systematic review. It needs to be affordable, safe, and it should have adequate psychosocial support. So is there that serious mental illness can have of their own. Substance disorder does to dire consequences. No, trust in the patient. Don't think that patients are going to manipulate you. Patients are going to go the wrong way. Trust the patient, because substance use disorder with houses does not lead to dire consequences according to HCT. Patients with houses are more satisfied. Less admissions, less emergency service utilization was seen, but no clinical improvement. As expected, we can't expect the positive or negative symptoms of schizophrenia to improve if the patient is in house or institution. But other aspects of outcome, there was significant improvement. Okay. The final perspective that we to in this about this. Now, this is something that is happening in the past probably 10 years. The first picture is, the blue picture is about crowdfunding. I know more people know about it. Crowdfunding or crowdsourcing is a situation in which the community or the masses are engaged in such a way that, for example, if I have an idea and I have an idea regarding a product, So I don't have to go sell my house. I don't have to go behind rich people for capital. I have to crowdfund it. And the internet post the idea, and lot of people, thousands uh, of people put a small amount to that, and as a contribution, we will get the capital we need. So this is called a crowdfunding. If you look at internet, we can see a lot of crowdfunding in the endeavors can be seen. The second, we all know, it is social media, especially video platforms. When you, it is a radical change from what we are used to. For example, some of the most important, most richest people in the world, like owner or CEO of Facebook and YouTube and other TikTok, Instagram. So these people actually have not done it natively. Their app, what product, absolutely creatively. Just create a platform from which the masses can come and express them. The masses can contribute. We look at the Facebook, we don't look at what the Mark Zuckerberg is updating. We look at our friends and whatever things they are doing. Whatever we are looking at the face, looking at, it is actually an effort of our friends and the community that we are. So this kind of a community mobilization, a mass mobilization was there in all aspects of our society. It was reflected in psychiatric rehabilitation also. Most people guessed looking for peer driven. So mental health action plan aim was to integrate the perspectives and engagement of service users, that are the patients, families, and community. So from an exclusive point of view, which the mental health care was given an exclusive club of psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, psychiatric social workers, vocational, and other staff. This exclusivity has been changing to an integrative approach in which we are incorporating and we are recruiting people who are not specialists from the community to help with the rehabilitation. So this is what a peer delivered service. Peer delivered service actually about in ND, now it has run more, and so is about us without us. You can't do anything to us without us. That is, without the patient's input, without the patient's cooperation, without the stakeholders' involvement, nothing should be done. That is the motto of peer delivered service. So it's delivered by individuals with lived experience of mental or substance use disorder. So people with psychiatric illness and mental use disorders are in remission or in recovery, volunteer and become what we call peer support specialist. To become a peer support specialist, we have to undergo a training certification. Now, I don't know if it is in India. United States, number of cities who are providing certification, including online training and certification. So what they do is that they do case management, support group, they do supported employment for other people who are suffering from similar conditions. Now, letting a patient manage the case of a currently symptomatic patient, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but that is our paternalistic view speaking. There is evidence, two reviews, one from Cochrane review 2013, other evidence AE CD 2000, both show to a specialist, the peer support specialist as the patients who are engaged with peer support specialists had similar outcome to that of mental health professionals, especially in case management and group therapy facilitation. So there is even a small reduction in crisis emergency services. So they don't underestimate them. They are actually capable of doing a lot of things that we think we were alone able to do. Similar outcome was seen in the second review, in which there was reduced admission and improved outcomes. Of course, one of the ways of this review negative, but generally a positive outcome. delivered services. For example, we have that model in substance use. It is called Alcoholics Anonymous. We know that, right? It is now acting as an autonomous or at least a semi-autonomous body, and it is doing significant work in rehabilitation of substance use patients. I think we all agree with that. So this model has to be incorporated not only in substance use but also in all the mental health rehabilitation measures. So what we are looking at is we are approaching the last part of our discussion, the importance of technology information rehabilitation. In spite of that, I will change my account. Just now. Of that, actually, what is an example of this technological innovation into medical science. In 1 year ago, I cannot even think of doing what we webinar and attending a webinar, presenting a webinar like this, right? So let us look at rehabilitation in information age. Some of the important areas which there is what we call improvement. One of actually feedback, it has all covered by Mina madam, so won't be in dwelling into details. Even the other things we are just going to go through. So 5.16 billion people are using mobile phones. 5.16 billion people are using phones, right? To understand it, you must understand that only 4.5 billion people are using toilets. So number of mobile phone users are much higher than number of people who are using toilets. So probably when they are going in the wild, they are probably browsing in phones. That is the situation which is paradoxical, ironic that we are in. Most people with smartphones, smartphone, but a lot of people do not have toilets. And 4.57 million people are using internet, and 3.18 billion people are using social media. About half people in the world are using social media. So these are important, very, very important areas that we should not overlook. Study 2006, it was that mental illness, mobile phone people with was of general, the number with smart low, but other than that, the use of mental illness is similar to that of the general population. So some of the sources that are available through phone and web I have outlined. It is mainly from United States. I don't know if anything is there in India. I believe there are people who are expert in this area than me, who will contribute at the end of the presentation about the advance of this thing in India, because I don't know. About the basic prototype that you can use SMS or call, which if call free number 1424, that kind of approach to assessment so free. Are the patient that are called to get the appropriate results. Second is a focus app. Focus app is also for people with schizophrenia, and this focus app is to be used in a smartphone, in which they will prompt to take medication. They will prompt to will ask how much sleep the patient has got. They will ask about the mood of the patient, and they will ask about the social functioning of the patient. And if there is an impairment in any one area, if you click on that, a brief pre-recorded intervention, an interactive intervention will come up in the mobile screen, and they will, for example, patient is having problem with sleep, then the intervention will be sleep hygiene techniques. So it is an immediate correction of their problem that is afforded by this focus app. And other web-based interventions like coping with voices in patients with auditory hallucination, Source, that is schizophrenia resource, and Horizon, all are web-based resources that is available for patients illness. Other, they are social media. if you look to number of people who are first or came off the closet, their mental, and many of the people who are viewing comments below that shows that they are also inspired and they are also following the same. So they are also suffering from the same illness and they can relate to it. So in YouTube, without any of our help, they are doing it. Limitation is that in Indian study by in 2018 by Sinha, it was found that only 32% of patients in India have smartphone with 39% in caregivers. There's a language barrier. India, there are lots of languages and most of the applications, because they are not designed for students, it was English and was for people. Literacy is low. In population, literacy is low. And in technology, use of technology. So illness, misuse of technology is actually a big problem, because I had a patient recently who was having schizophrenia, and this patient actually searched the internet, and in internet there are a lot of conspiracy theories and paranoid theories they put forward. So in the internet, he found a site probably made by a patient with poor reality testing, and they found that in this website it is detailed how the chip is inserted into the brain, and because of the use of technology, the delusion of that person actually increased. So that is a problem with technology. Second part of the technological improvement or advance was seen in neurofeedback. It is a process by which sensory representation of brain is fed to the user time, goal of regulation. Most of you have attended the neurofeedback. Nothing. It is just controlling the brain. We are seeing the waves of, we are recording it, then we are observing it, and we are trying to change the waves of the brain. The patient itself, himself or herself, is trying to change the waves of the brain to such a way that finally the whatever symptom that we are targeting is remitted. So the step is first data acquisition. That is how the activity of brain is recorded, usually by EEG. There are other methods like functional MRI and near infrared and magnetic spectroscopy, etc. Second is processing. So this electrical signals are converted into digital signals in the computer. Then feedback is generated. Feedback is generated as an image. Can be generated game. Screen game entire using without use of hand. This is a feedback, and finally the learner will respond by respond to it. So this is the learner. So this is the 4 key steps for feedback, and it has found useful in improving cognitive performance, regulating mood, to induce relaxation and motor performances. Best evidence is for ADHD. There is some evidence for substance use disorder like crystal meth use, autism, depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia. We have dealt with it before, so that is why I'm not going into the. Also, we are reaching that discussion. My throat is okay. So the neuro is that standardization protocol. Every study, most studies are doing different protocols, so there is no way we can actually do a meta-analysis or a systematic review. Second is the transfer problem. Transfer problem means many patients, the EEG rhythm or the waves actually will come back to normal, but in real life functioning will not be there, or brain waves will come back to normal, but the patient ADHD symptoms may not improve. That is a transfer problem. Lack of control for muscle activities. So one of another method is that since we are recording the activity from the scalp, the change in the tension in the muscles of the scalp, that is from what we call occipitofrontalis muscle, it may actually reflexively contract as a part of feedback, and this contraction will see as a change in ECG waves. And people may think, yes, the waves have appeared and patient has improved, but patient has not improved. Blinding is very difficult in this procedure. Sham procedures are very difficult. You may have to ask the child to play a real game to make it him a role. I don't know. blinding is very difficult. And there is 30 to 50% of people who are able to do this. Percentage of people able to brainwave according to field. These are the important critiques, but still it is a promising area. It is an arsenal. It is a tool that we can keep in our arsenal because we don't have so much right now, right? And the final part of my discussion is regarding virtual reality. So most people, I believe, know what virtual reality. If you look at my screen and if you look at my background, it is like a beach with waves and a coconut tree moving. So this is an augmented real, and it's behind actually an augmentation, or it is what we call a virtual augmentation. So combining that to what is real is called an augmented reality. Some of our smartphones may have that, but virtual reality is a completely immersive virtual experience. It means there is no real component to it. Everything is quite immersive. So it is a human-computer interface consisting of an environment which lets the people immerse themselves, navigate, and interact in. So how do you interact with a virtual environment? So we will look at, there are two types of virtual reality. One head mount, we have seen it walls and everything, and along peripherals. What is the peripherals? It our movement. Also, if virtual reality trying to something to a book, will give and feedback with you to what we call become immersive virtual world. Second is, of course, without the use of head-mounted visual display system, it is called CAVE. CAVE, the first name is CAVE. CAVE is the whole short form of it. Also, the first is CAVE, automatic virtual environment, in which project 4 or 6 walls are projected so that the person feels that he is in a different environment. So the virtual reality is not something that is current. It has been used for, I think, 30 years. I think it has for at least definitely. It's used for and phobia. This virtual was used. The most for PT, it is actually integral part of PTSD management in veterans, in army professionals who are having psychiatric in like PTSD, integral in rehabilitation called brain mind brave initiative. Who is that people kind of here, of course, in the United States, from Afghanistan, Iraq. So what is that they create a virtual reality of Iraq or Afghanistan, so that person exposed to that and again get disinfected. So it basically the people of greater exposure and some desensitization. Anxiety and phobia, it shows results. Schizophrenia be used for social skill, educational training, medical management, and hallucination. You know about avatar therapy, right? Avatar therapy, the human face, and we attribute hallucination at human face, and as a result, the person can what is hallucination therapy. And vocational training in autism, a virtual environment is interview environment is constructed so that they can train for vocation. Dementia and mild cognitive for detection of cognitive impairment and training virtual reality used. Limitations, it is a rounded set, not the most comfortable to wear. It's not heavy, it's still not comfortable to wear. It causes anxiety and distress in elderly because a change in the world they are looking at with 360-degree view, it is genuinely going to cause anxiety and distress. So to be prepared. Virtual reality sickness is there. It is like sickness without people headache or nauseous because constant. But virtual reality, new improved graph actually seem to minimize this effect. addiction can be virtual, it's very addictive, much healing. The like my background is much more than normal background. It's just a bit of fan and roof. And for people poor reality thing, we have an exacerbated delusional thing with virtual reality. They already have with reality, but last thing we need alternate reality. So this is a right video of cognitive rehabilitation done through virtual reality. So a person, I believe, stroke or something, or dementia, is given this mount head, and he has been trained to cross the road. We know that cross the road is a big problem. Even some of my colleagues whose gender remain unmentioned is finding it difficult to cross the road. So this is important part. It's going to be really difficult, almost whole cognitive problems. So this is a video, but there is apparent difference in the what we call refresh. You'll be able to see. We'll share with this video, just half a minute video. So in this video, we are looking at patient is patient inside this world, the road and a lot of vehicles. Now they calculate the gap and have to cross the road, and if that successful, then they would have completed the task. Second part is something found out very interesting. Then the video is very bad, blurry. Things working. Basically, it is the virtual reality is happening. Instead of going to an actual room where there is group therapy, you just have to stay in your room, wear a headset, wear a virtual reality system, and then in a room or other people. So in this, actually clear that the point of it seems to be a problem. I'll try it in YouTube. Even it will be. You can see. Excuse me a second. Yeah, you can see video in YouTube. This is called VR group therapy session. And top left, you can see top corner. You can this is the person who is actually conducting the group therapy. Actually, a member of the team, and she is wearing a mounted set. And what she experienced, what we're seeing in the rest of the screen, is in transfer into virtual room with books. There is a fire there, and the people who are other the group are talking. Something that, of course, the graph doesn't seem great. We ask that their experience and how they're having are all by this mount headset, and of it there is a, and this is from that 3%. So as if are actually at room. One of the examples of virtual reality group therapy. It is a very topic. Catch on the future. Conclusion. We'll share the details of. So in conclusion, the things that for granted, ideological, exclusive, paternalistic, and remission oriented conventional method of psychiatric rehabilitation has to a better evidence inclusive, patient-centered, recovery-oriented, and technology-incorporated field of science. So it is what we call optimism. There is hope in this. Uh, this is my final. I would thank everyone for listening to me patiently, and I think that should change. Thank you all for participating. If you have any queries or any contribution to the topic, like I said, the ultimate expert or authority in field. I'm people in the audience have more experience with certain aspects of this than me, so free to contribute.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Right now it's the time for audience and participants. If you have any queries or any input related to the topic, you are free to come into the chat session.
I'm just looking at the God. Some there to be some audio problems here. Have you felt? I welcome everyone for your words of encouragement. It seems that some of the people had some audio problems. Not all of them. Some of them had audio problems. Anyway, I'll share this slide in our group, in our WhatsApp group, and there are some references there. Most of the things I have said is evidence-based, and there are references there that can use. Hope I will be useful for you. Shall we continue? Is there any queries?
Sir, there are. It looks like there are a few questions, sir.
Yeah. Okay. One of the questions that I have seen in the chat box by Shilpa, hi Shilpa, is that the use of virtual reality for children, any researches? And now I have not come across any research that exclusively focused on children, but it is almost entirely I can predict that children will be the first to adopt this because children are very good at adopting new technology, and this is something that they will be absolutely interested in adopting, like smartphones and screens, etc. And one of the study of virtual reality that is done in autistic patients, actually majority of the people were children. One of the study to improve the social skills, many of them were children, about 10 years, or I believe about 10 years of age. So I believe virtual reality can easily be incorporated, can be adopted by children. And we are actually in the nascent part of the virtual reality rehabilitation. So there is a need for a lot of research, lot more research to say anything. Now, this is one of the question. An interesting question is that by Nimisha, saying that everyone should be able to participate in individual placement and service. That is there. But even with people with profound disability, how can they participate? That is true. This is the basic principle of India IPS. The basic principle of IPS, of course, is that zero exclusion. Doesn't matter how or what type of disability that you have, but if you have intent, or if you want to participate vocationally, then you can participate in vocation. Of course, I was exaggerating when someone with total disability, who's, they may not be able to participate. They probably won't have the what we call cognitive level to think and want something like vocation, but still most people in moderate to severe level of category in their own way can participate. And it is the responsibility of the policymaker to ensure that such jobs are available. It may not be highly skilled job, but even then that jobs are available for them in a competitive way. It is basically more of a theoretical aspect, but even then the aim, what we are aiming for, is that to incorporate everyone who desires to work to IPS. I have experience in virtual reality, but it is not for therapeutic purposes. My main field of work is actually de-addiction. However, I have experience in virtual reality as a consumer, and I liked it very much. I apologize for the voice breakage. I don't know what happened. I hope it is clear now. So, shall we conclude this session?
If the participants are okay, like if there are no more questions.
Excuse me. There is.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah, that is in the study. Yeah, interest of the patient is more important than strength and weakness. That means if we assess the patient's strength and weakness, we decide that he is better for this, he is better for that, and we try to make the patient do that work, he will almost invariably stop doing that. So it is better to ask the patient, instead of assuming a paternalistic view, ask the patient about their interests, and these are the options that are available to you. You can choose whatever that you feel like. In fact, there is a lot of case studies saying that people, even though most people think that they are unfit for the job, actually when they are placed in the job of their interest, they are actually working very well. One of the case studies, individual case study, I forgot the details of it, but there are multiple case studies and individual experiences, and the large scale RCTs and meta-analysis also support this model. So that should be what we are aiming, should be our aim. It's not easy for us because we are not a resource rich country. Even then, we can make a difference, at least in some patients. This training and participation model is definitely inferior to that of IPS model. Even housing model, first model, it is actually predominant in the United States. In Australia and other parts of the Western countries, they are not as predominant. They are still using the linkage services, but the evidence is strong in housing first model and IPS supported employment. Next time you go to a mall, don't forget to experience the virtual reality. If some of you have not already experienced it, it has potential use in our professional life. So shall we conclude?
I hope there are no more questions. If it is so, we can conclude. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Okay. On behalf of Department of Clinical Psychology, CRC, and the participants, we thank you, sir, for having a wonderful session, regardless of that small voice breakage that happened in between the session. But apart from that, we were really thankful to you. And when we are coming to an end to our this webinar series, first of all, I should thank the head of the department, Jidin K, for having to organizing such a wonderful webinar series, and to our director, Dr. Roshan Bijli, for helping us for in every area for this webinar to be a successful one. And most importantly, I thank you all the participants who were really eager and being actively participated in our these 5-day series and all. And there are a few announcements that I have to make. One, the first thing, we are coming to an end to our webinar series, and tomorrow we have one more session. It will be a post webinar session. It will be exclusively for 30 members, and we will let you know about the details by today evening or tomorrow morning. And it will be a informal gathering with Dr. Jasim Kurankot, Assistant Professor, Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Calicut. And it will be exclusively for 30 members, and it will be it required an active participation. So the requirements are a laptop will be preferably required with the video on, and that's a one announcement that we have to make for tomorrow's session. And also we have mentioned in the group about filling the certificates. Still there are a few more people yet to be filled, so kindly do that. And once again, thank you, Tom sir, Dr. Tom, for your wonderful session, and to the participants for being with us for 5 days in this webinar series. I hope it was really helpful for you. You can give us your feedbacks, and if you have any suggestions or any feedbacks about the webinar series, you can come into the chat section. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.